The dog did not remember the first train. He only knew that his life had always been tied to the tracks. He had been a thin, scruffy pup when the station still breathed. Back then, the rails shone with grease and dust, and the air trembled every few hours with the weight of steel and the echo of wheels. People stepped off and on with bags and voices and smells from other places. The platform boards shook under their feet, and old news blew about in torn tickets and discarded papers. In those days, he followed a man in a uniform. The man smelled of iron and soap and long nights. He wore a cap with a dull badge and a coat that was always brushed but never really clean. He walked with the rhythm of someone who had learned to keep step with timetables. The pup trotted behind him along the platform, between the waiting room and the signal box, from the office with its dusty glass to the benches where passengers sat. Sometimes the man would tilt his head and make a short sound, and the pup would trot a little faster, catching up. The first time a locomotive came in close, the pup thought the world was ending. The rails began to hum before the train appeared. The hum turned into a metallic singing, then into a roar. The engine burst around the bend in the valley like a black animal with bright eyes and a hot breath. Steam billowed, brakes screamed, iron clanged. The pup flattened himself under a bench and watched through trembling whiskers as people stepped down, as boots and shoes and heels passed inches from his nose. He smelled oil, coal smoke, leather, perfume, sweat, faraway fields, strange cigarettes, everything at once. The man in uniform walked the length of the train, checking doors, calling out something the pup never understood. His voice rose and fell in a pattern that matched the whistle and the creak of couplings. Over time, the noise became part of the dog's heartbeat. He grew into a medium, sturdy animal with a thick neck and dark, kind eyes. His coat was a mix of brown and black and old rust, the same colors as the sleepers under the rails. A faint white line ran from his muzzle to between his eyes, as if someone had traced the path of a single falling snowflake there. He learned the timetable without any clock. He knew that dawn brought the freight that always smelled of grain and metal. Midday brought the passenger train with bags and parcels and voices from the city. Evening brought the tired last train home with fewer people, softer steps, quieter faces. He learned to listen to the valley. Far down where the rails curled behind the low hills, the train announced itself long before any human noticed. The dog felt it first through his paws, through the ground. A shiver of vibration moved along the stones and sleepers. Then, faint and far, came the thin call of the whistle, stretched by distance. When he felt that shiver, he would rise from his place near the station door and move to the platform edge. The man in uniform often walked with him. Together they stood and watched the curve in the valley, waiting for the first black shape to appear. In this way, many years passed. The dog did not change quickly. His muzzle silvered slowly. His runs along the rails became shorter, his naps longer. But the pattern held. Trains came, trains went. The station breathed in and out, day after day, year after year. The world beyond the tracks changed more. Cars grew faster on the distant road. Buses came where once there had only been occasional dusty trucks. The town at the far end of the line put up new signs and new houses. People carried different kinds of bags and different kinds of fears. The station did not belong to that new pace. At first, there were simply fewer trains, The morning freight stopped coming every day. Some days the dog waited, paws on the platform edge, ears tilted forward, and nothing came. The whistle did not sound. The tracks did not hum. The man in uniform had more empty hours. He spent them in the office, hunched over papers that never seemed to change anything, or leaning in the doorway, smoking thin cigarettes down to the filter. The dog lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes half closed, listening to the silence between faraway vehicles. Once, a crew in bright vests came with strange measuring tools. They walked the length of the platform and the tracks, talking to each other with clipped, tired voices. They did not smell of coal and oil. They smelled of new plastic and city fabrics. The dog followed them at a distance. He watched as they shook their heads, pointed at rotten sleepers, at flaking paint, at rust blooming on bolts and rails. One of them bent to pat his head automatically, without looking. The dog accepted the touch and smelled no train on the man's hand, no real metal, only office. Sometime after that, notices went up. The man in uniform read them alone. His lips moved without sound. The creases on his face deepened. He tore one of the notices down and folded it into his pocket. The last official train came on a tired autumn afternoon. The dog did not know it was the last. For him, it was just another arrival in the gentle decline of the station's days. The whistle from the valley sounded a little weaker. The engine carried more dust. The cars behind it were fewer. People stepped off more quickly, as if already thinking of their next connection somewhere else. When the train left, its wheels made a mournful, drawn-out sound over the joints in the rails, as if reluctant to let go. The dog trotted along the platform, as he always did, ears back against the wind from the passing cars, tail held low but steady. The man in uniform stood very straight as it passed, cap pulled down hard. When the last car vanished around the curve, he let his shoulders fall. That night, the station lights went off earlier than usual. The next morning, no freight came, no midday passenger came, no tired evening train came. The dog waited all 3 times. He sat at the platform edge, looking down the valley, ears pricked, body tense. The ground stayed still. The air carried only the sounds of distant cars on the new road and a few birds in the scrub near the tracks. The whistle did not come. Days passed in the same way. No train rounded the bend. No lights cut the dusk. No familiar vibrations moved up the steel into the dog's bones. Men came again, this time with tools for ending things. They unscrewed signals, removed useful parts from the signal box, shut doors with final clicks. They shook hands with the man who had worn the uniform so long, clapped him on the shoulder, drove away. After they left, the station felt different. There was more echo in the waiting room, as if the building had suddenly grown larger inside. Dust settled in thicker layers. Weeds pushed harder between platform boards. The rails began to dull, then to rust. The man stayed in one small room at the back. He was no longer really in uniform. He kept the cap, more from habit than duty, but his jacket hung on a nail. He moved slower. His hair, once neatly hidden under the cap, grew thinner and whiter. Yet, he didn't truly leave the station. He had nowhere else to go, and even if he had, the rhythm of his life had been built around tracks and timetables for so many years that silence felt less like freedom and more like unfinished business. The dog stayed with him. With no trains to chase or greet, the dog's days narrowed to small loops. He patrolled the empty platform. He explored the tracks as far as his old legs allowed. He slept in a patch of sunlight by the waiting room window, ears flicking at each distant sound, as if any of them might yet be the whistle he knew. The first time they heard the ghost train, it was deep in the night. The valley was thick with mist. The ruined station slept in a soft gray cocoon. The world beyond the tracks did what worlds do at night. It creaked and cooled and turned in its sleep. The dog woke with his heart already racing. He did not know why at first. He was used to waking. Old bodies have shallow sleep. But this time, something in the air was different. He felt it under his paws before he understood it in his ears. The floorboards of the station trembled just slightly, the way they had long ago when heavy engines approached. A faint, metallic murmur ran along the rails outside. A whisper of old vibrations returned. His ears lifted, his body stiffened. He stood, joints complaining, and moved to the doorway. The man in the back room woke too. He was used to waking at nothing. A branch against the wall, a car on the road, a memory. At his age, sleep came in pieces. But this time, like the dog, he felt something through the bed and the walls. He sat up slowly, held his breath, and listened. From far down the valley came the sound of a whistle. It was thin with distance, but clear. Not like any car or factory or wind. It was the voice the valley had once known so well. A metal throat calling ahead to crossings and bends, announcing its arrival to hills and small towns. The man's heart clenched around an emptiness he had carried since the last train left. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. In the dark, he groped for his cap and placed it on his head, hand trembling just a little. Habit guided him to the door. The dog met him there, eyes bright, tail beating once, twice, unsure. Together they stepped out onto the platform. The mist hugged the ground. The rails glinted faintly in starlight where rust had not yet eaten all the shine. The old signal posts stood like tired sentries with their arms frozen in their last, useless positions. Down the valley, the sound grew. There was no doubt now. The hum of wheels, the low thunder of weight over track, the rhythm of wagons or cars pulling against couplings, all of it rose up the line. The whistle sounded again, a little closer, pressing against the mist. The dog felt the vibration through his paws, through his chest, through his skull. He stepped to the platform edge, as he had done 1,000 times, and looked toward the curve. He saw nothing. The man shaded his eyes with his hand, as if daylight might suddenly break through. Old instinct made him glance at where the signal lights would once have been, at where the distant warning light should have glowed red or green. All was dark. Yet the sound came on. The rails hummed now, a clear metallic song. The wooden sleepers creaked as if bearing weight. The very air seemed to bulge ahead of a moving locomotive. The dog leaned forward, his muscles tensed to brace against the familiar wind of a passing engine. His ears flattened. His tail dropped. He prepared for the rush of movement, the blast of steam or diesel exhaust, the sharp smell of oil and brake dust. The train did not appear. The sound reached the bend in the valley, curled around it, and rolled straight toward the station. The rhythm of wheels moved along the line directly in front of them, as precise and unstoppable as memory. Wind swept past them in a strong, sudden gust. The dog's fur flattened along his sides. The man's coat flapped against his legs. Dust from the platform boards lifted in a thin cloud. A scrap of an old ticket, forgotten in a crack, fluttered into the air. They both braced, and nothing visible passed. No headlamp cut through the mist. No engine loomed. No line of cars clattered by. Yet the pressure of air, the sound of weight, the small rattles of bolts and plates and old nails all insisted that a train was there, moving fast, going somewhere. The dog's head turned, following the invisible motion. His eyes tracked an empty section of darkness, as if it were occupied by steel and light. His ears followed the sound as it moved along the platform, then past the station, then away up the line toward the opposite curve. The man did the same, though his eyes saw only night and fog and a few distant stars. The whistle blew once more as it departed, a long, drawn-out call that hung in the valley even after the rest of the sound had begun to fade. Then the rails went quiet. The station boards stopped trembling. The wind settled back into its usual smaller patterns. The scrap of ticket drifted down and lay still. For a long time, the man and the dog stood there. The man's hand rested on the dog's head, fingers buried in old fur. The dog leaned against his leg, breath coming fast but steady. Neither of them moved until the chill of the night finally pressed through their fur and clothes and reminded their bodies that they were no longer made for endless waiting. They went back inside without a word. In the morning, the valley looked ordinary again. Mist burned off, grass glistened with dew, birds flitted through the scrub where once passengers had stepped from trains. The rails were the same dull, rust-streaked lines. No fresh marks showed, no oil, no new shine. If anyone had come to the station that day and asked the old man if he had slept well, he might have shrugged and said nothing much happens out here now. But no one came. The road had taken the traffic. The station was not on the way to anywhere. So the only ones who knew were the man and the dog. The sound did not return the next night, or the next. For a while, they half convinced themselves that age had played tricks on them. Old buildings make noises. Old bones do too. Dreams slide into waking more easily when the lines between days blur. Then, a week or so later, on a night when stars were sharp and the valley air felt like cold glass, the whistle called again. This time, the dog was already awake. He rose from the floor before the vibration reached the boards and walked to the door with the slow, steady step of someone walking into something already known. The man followed, pulling on his coat with hands that shook a little less than before. They stepped onto the platform. The same pattern unfolded. The whisper in the rails, the rise of the hum, the rhythm of invisible wheels, the wind of a passing train that did not exist. Again, the dog watched the empty darkness move, head and tail and ears adjusting as if tracking real cars and carriages. Again, the man stood and listened, cap on his white head, eyes on the curve that showed nothing. After that, the ghost train came more often. It did not arrive every night. It had no timetable pinned on any wall. Sometimes it skipped a week. Sometimes it came 3 nights in a row, as if making up for lost time. But it always came deep in the night, when the valley was quiet enough that even small sounds carried far. It always followed the same path, from far down near the old junction where the line met the main network, up past the cliffs, along the platform, and away toward the high hills where the rails ended now in weeds. And it always felt most real to the dog. He began to live for it. The days shrank to small circles again, but now those circles had a center. He slept more in the afternoons, saving his strength for the hours after midnight. His hearing, though dulled by age for other noises, stayed sharp for the faint first tremor of that familiar hum. When it came, he was young again for a few minutes. He would rise with the quickness of his earlier years, move to the edge of the platform, and stand with paws inches from the first rail. His body would lean forward as the invisible engine approached. As the sound rushed by, he would trot a few steps along the platform, as he had once trotted beside the real evening train, ears back, fur flattened by the wind. To anyone watching from outside, it would have looked like a strange, sad game, an old dog greeting an emptiness. But to him, the emptiness was full. The man sometimes wondered who else, if anyone, might sense it. He began to test this in small ways. Once he left an old lantern hanging by the signal post, unlit, and watched to see whether its glass would tremble when the train passed. It did, just slightly, a tiny rattle of metal against glass. Another time he scattered a line of dry leaves along the platform's edge. On a still night, when the ghost train came, the leaves lifted and swirled in the same pattern he remembered from real trains long ago. Sometimes he left his old pocket watch on the windowsill. The watch had stopped years before and refused to run, no matter how carefully he coaxed its mechanism. On some nights, when the ghost train thundered by, the thin hand inside twitched forward by a fraction, then stopped again. It never kept time, but it moved with the echo of a timetable that no longer existed. He never spoke of these things aloud. There was no one to tell. The few people he met in town when he went for supplies had their own troubles. They spoke of fuel prices, of roadworks, of distant jobs. They sometimes asked if he was really still living out at the old station, as if that were a peculiar choice instead of the only thing he knew. He did not mention the train that came without lights. The years leaned on them both. The old man's hands grew slower. His steps turned careful on the worn boards. He coughed more in cold weather. Yet he kept a small corner of the station tidy, swept, and swept again, as if expecting some inspection that never came. The dog's muzzle turned almost completely white. His eyes grew cloudy around the edges, though they cleared when the rails hummed. Sometimes his legs betrayed him on the stairs down from the platform, and he had to take them one at a time. Still, as long as they could, they went out together when the sound called. There were nights when fog lay so thick on the tracks that even the dog hesitated to step close, feeling the moisture soak into his fur. There were winter nights when frost made the boards slick and treacherous. On those nights, the man sometimes stayed in the doorway, hand on the frame, while the dog went on alone to the edge. It was on such a night, a winter night with frost on every nail and board, that the pattern finally changed. The dog had been sleeping heavily. Age brings the kind of sleep that is less rest and more escape, deep and sudden, with equally sudden returns. He woke with a start so sharp that his old joints jolted. The hum in the rails was already strong. He struggled up, paws slipping slightly on the cold floor, and made for the door. The man, awake but slow, reached for his coat with fingers that did not obey him quickly enough. "Wait," he might have said if he still spoke much, but his voice had grown thin from disuse. The words stayed mostly in his chest. The dog pushed the door with his shoulder and stepped onto the platform. The night was clear, brittle, full of stars. Frost made every surface glitter faintly. The rails shone more than usual, as if someone had polished them for an important arrival. The sound of the ghost train came closer. It seemed stronger than on other nights, louder, more solid. The wind ahead of it arrived early, streaming down the valley with a sharp edge, cutting through the dog's old coat. He shivered, but stepped up to the platform edge all the same. Far down the line, the whistle called. It sounded less thin tonight. It carried a hint of something like, "Welcome." The dog's heart hammered. His paws trembled, not only from age, but from something like excitement and something like fear. His whole life had been a line between waiting and arriving. This moment felt like both. Behind him, the man finally reached the door. He leaned on the frame, breath coming a little short, and looked out. The dog stood at the edge like a carved figure, still, head held high, ears angled forward. The hum became a roar. The rails rang as if struck. The wooden sleepers creaked. The wind hammered against the station walls. Dust lifted in a fine, glittering veil. The dog took one step forward. On every other night, he had stayed safely on the platform, respecting the invisible boundary between animal and machine, between track and waiting room. Tonight, something in the sound, in the feeling of the air, in the depth of the vibration, pulled him closer. He stepped off the platform and onto the ballast. His paws crunched on frost-covered stones. He moved carefully between the rails as he had done when younger to follow his human along the line. The steel beneath his paws felt colder than the air, yet also strangely alive. The man's heart lurched. He opened his mouth to call, to tell the dog to come back, to stay safe on the boards. But the words stuck in his throat, and the wind carrying the sound of the train tore at his voice. The dog reached the center of the track and stopped. He stood with his body square between the rails, facing the oncoming sound. His tail hung still. His ears were not flat this time. They were up, fully, as if greeting something he had been expecting for a very long time. The ghost engine reached the bend. For the first time, the man thought he saw something. Not a clear shape, not a solid body of steel, but a disturbance in the starlight, a thickening of the air along the line, like heat over a road on a hot day. The frost on the rails ahead of it steamed faintly, as if touched by a warmth that did not belong to this night. The dog did not move. The invisible locomotive, with all its weight of years and journeys and schedules, rushed toward him. The wind ahead of it struck the station like a wall. The boards shook. The signal posts creaked. The man gripped the door frame with both hands to keep from falling. At the last moment, when every old reflex screamed that he should jump away, the dog simply closed his eyes. The sound hit like a tide. For a heartbeat, the man could not see the dog at all. The air between the platforms and the tracks became a blur of frost, dust, and movement. It felt as if every memory of every train that had ever passed this station was crossing it again in a single instant. Then the roar moved on. The wind followed it up the line. The rails sang for a few seconds longer, then quieted. The whistle called once, far away, fading into the hills. Silence dropped over the station like a blanket. The man blinked the tears from his eyes, half from the cold, half from something else. He leaned forward, breath shallow, and looked at the tracks. They were empty. There was no shape between the rails, no dog standing stubbornly in the frost. Only two lines of steel, rimed with ice, running away into the dark. For a long time, he did not move. Age and loss and cold pinned him to the doorway. His hands ached on the frame. His legs felt heavy. His ears rang with the echo of wheels that had never truly touched these rails for many years. He stepped down at last. Each step to the track bed cost him effort. The boards were slippery. The stones underfoot shifted. He reached the place where the dog had stood and looked down. On one of the wooden sleepers, in a thin patch where the frost had melted, there were prints. They were fresh and clear. 4 small pads, claws showing, pointing up the line. The tracks of a dog in old age, when weight is a little lighter on the hind legs than it once was. They led forward, toward the curve where trains had always appeared. There were only a few of them. They did not continue into the distance. They stopped after a short run, fading where the frost thickened again. Beyond them, the sleepers showed nothing but the confused marks of time and weather. The man stood there until the stars blurred overhead. He felt neither the cold nor the stiffness in his knees. He only felt the absence pressed hard against his ribs and a strange calm under the ache. He knew, with the part of his mind that had always counted trains and knew when one was late, that whatever had just happened was not something he could add to a logbook. He also knew, with the part of his heart that had walked platforms beside a brown and black dog for so many years, that the waiting was over for at least one of them. After that night, the ghost train still came. Not as often, not with the same strength. Its whistle, when it sounded, carried a different note, thinner, further away, as if the valley were slowly letting go of that old sound. The man still heard it. He still rose when the hum touched the rails. He still stepped out onto the platform, cap on his white head, but he no longer walked down to the track bed. He stood where he had once stood as a younger man, back straight, hands behind his back, and watched the invisible cars pass. Sometimes, when the wind was right, he thought he could hear another sound mixed in with the rhythm of the wheels. The faint, steady patter of paws trotting along beside the train, keeping time. On such nights, he smiled, a thin, cracked thing, and whispered a word that no human heard. The station grew older. The roof leaked in more places. Paint peeled. Glass cracked. Weeds took the platform as their own. The rails sank deeper into rust and dirt. One day, some new crew might come to lift them entirely, to erase the old line. If they do, they will find nothing unusual. Just iron and wood and stone and dust. No sign that, for a while, a dog and an old station man listened together to something that no one else believed in. Until then, the dead railway holds its ghosts. On certain cold nights, if someone were to stand on that forgotten platform, breathe very quietly, and listen with the whole of their bones, they might just hear, from far down the valley, the thin call of a whistle and the distant rhythm of wheels. And if they looked very closely at the frost along the rails, they might see, melted into the white for a moment, the shape of paw prints running alongside the empty, endless track, as a loyal dog finally caught the last train that had never stopped for anyone else.